Welcome to the Cinematic Trail, an AI-generated deep dive conversation into the ever-evolving world of cinematography. From exposure theory to lens choices, from lighting philosophy to creative workflows, we explore the craft, the gear, and the stories behind the frame, one trail marker at a time. Want to take your cinematography to the next level? Explore our online courses and learn more at cinenomadic.com. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly insights and inspiration. Let's begin the journey.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Let's dive right in. You know, for decades, when you wanted to control how much light your camera captured, you focused on the exposure trinity.
Right, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. They were, well, the bedrock.
Exactly. But what if the way we've always thought about exposure is maybe a little outdated now in, the modern world of filmmaking?
That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? I mean, it challenges something really fundamental in cinematography. It's been around forever.
It absolutely does. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at some material you brought us from Chris Tinard at CNOMADIC. Specifically, his argument that in today's landscape, none of that traditional trinity is the primary way you should be controlling your exposure anymore.
Which is fascinating. And our mission with this deep dive, just for you listening, is to really get to the bottom of why this shift.
Yeah, how has evolving camera tech, especially sensor design, and, the power we now have in post-production, how has that fundamentally changed the game?
And why does that leave variable ND filters sort of sitting at the top as the essential tool now for controlling light without messing up your creative vision?
Let's jump right in then. So where does this whole idea even come from? I mean, Chris starts by laying out just how much has changed.
Yeah, even in his own career, starting back in 2004, he saw the move from those big broadcast cameras to DSLRs, then mirrorless, and what he calls maybe the biggest advancement, dual native ISO.
Dual native ISO. That's a term you hear, all the time now. And Tinard really emphasizes how it changes our core understanding of ISO.
Totally. It's not just about making the image brighter or darker anymore. Its main function now, he argues, is about optimizing the sensor's dynamic range.
Right. He makes a strong point that shooting at the camera's native ISO means you're capturing the most dynamic range possible with the least noise. And on some modern cinema cameras, like the Sony FX6 he often uses, it's not even a setting you can just quickly flip a dial on. You often have to dig into menus.
Which, by design, kind of signals that ISO isn't meant to be your go-to on-the-fly exposure adjustment anymore. You pick your native ISO for the best quality.
And ideally, you stick to it.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's where it got really interesting for me from his material. He talks about EI, exposure index, particularly on cameras like the FX6.
Yeah.
And how he was taught it was just for monitoring, making the image on your screen look right for you or the client on set.
Right, but not actually affecting the final recorded file. That was the common wisdom.
The idea was it was purely cosmetic metadata. But then came tools like Sony RAW and DaVinci Resolve.
And boom. He discovered that in Resolve, when you're working with that Sony RAW footage, the metadata from the EI setting is actually used.
It determines the exposure in post, meaning you can change your exposure based on that EI setting after you've recorded. It's baked in a way.
It just fundamentally shifts ISO or EI from being this fixed on-set thing to something you actually have flexibility with later.
Kind of like adjusting exposure on a raw still photo, right? Or how it's always worked on, say, high-end cinema cameras like Red.
Precisely. He even tells this story about literally switching EI settings while recording on the FX6, thinking it was just for his monitor, and then seeing the exposure actually change when he played it back in Resolve.
That's got to be a mind bend if you thought EI was just a preview setting.
Totally.
So ISO's primary role has really transformed. It's about optimizing dynamic range and offering that post-production latitude.
And if you look at those dynamic range charts camera makers provide, they visually show how adjusting EI or ISO shifts the available stops.
Yeah.
You're basically deciding where to put the latitude, more in the shadows or more in the highlights. It's not just about making the whole thing brighter.
Which is why he argues that if you're still just cranking the ISO up and down on set to brighten or darken your image, well, you're likely missing out.
Yeah, you're not optimizing your footage for either dynamic range or noise performance. You're just making it brighter.
It really highlights the need to understand what your sensor is actually doing under the hood.
Exactly. Our job isn't just lighting the scene anymore. It's about understanding the whole capture process, from light hitting the sensor all the way to the final image quality.
Okay, so ISO is kind of sidelined as the primary exposure knob. It's now more of a dynamic range and post tool. What about the other two pillars, aperture and shutter speed?
Well, his argument is equally strong there. They shouldn't be seen primarily as exposure controls either.
Okay, so what are they then?
He simplifies it beautifully, I think. They're creative tools. Full stop.
Creative tools, how so?
Aperture dictates your depth of field, how much is in focus, that blurry background look, or deep focus.
Right, the look.
And shutter speed dictates your motion blur, how movement is rendered. Smooth, choppy, whatever you need. These are artistic choices.
And this is where the conflict used to always happen, right? You'd want that beautiful, shallow depth of field with a wide open aperture.
Yeah, f1.8 or something?
Or maybe a specific shutter speed for that perfect smooth motion blur. But doing that would just blow out your exposure on a bright day.
You'd have to compromise. You'd stop down the aperture, losing your shallow focus, or speed up the shutter, making motion look weird.
Sacrificing your creative vision just to get the light level right.
Which brings us neatly to the hero of this new approach. The variable ND filter.
Ah, the VND.
Its single purpose, its reason for being, is just to reduce the amount of light hitting the sensor, neutrally, without affecting depth of field, motion blur, or color.
It's pure light control. And he really champions the built-in electronic variable NDs, the ones you find on cameras like the FX6.
Oh yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah.
Stepless, seamless, incredibly fast to adjust with just a little dial.
So much better than constantly screwing filters on and off the lens.
Exactly. Plus, since it's behind the lens, inside the camera body, you can change lenses all day long and your ND setting stays consistent. No need to swap filters for each lens.
That is key. It allows you to set your aperture for the exact depth of field you want.
Knock that in.
Set your shutter speed for the perfect motion blur. Or maybe to avoid issues like flicker from lights or screens.
Lock that in.
And then you simply dial the variable ND to get the exposure perfectly spot on.
It completely flips the old way of thinking.
He gives this great example, doesn't he? Needing a really slow shutter speed.
Yeah, like 2.5 seconds or something crazy.
To get massive motion blur on cars passing by in broad daylight, making a storefront pop.
Try doing that without a super heavy ND filter. But with the built-in variable ND, you just twist the dial until the exposure is right. You keep that slow shutter, get the blur you want.
But it's not just for those extreme effects, is it? He uses this approach on pretty much every shoot.
Even when he completely controls the lighting, yeah. And one huge benefit he highlights is adjusting exposure without messing up your lighting ratios.
Oh, this is huge on set. I mean, if you've spent hours setting up specific lighting ratios, you know, the key light is twice as bright as the fill, the background is half the key.
I've got it perfect.
And then you realize, oh, overall, we're maybe a stop too bright. Traditionally, what do?
Nightmare. You'd have to tell the gaffer to dim all the lights proportionally. Dim the key, dim the fill, dim the background light, all by the same amount.
Which takes time, effort, and can be really disruptive.
But with a variable ND, you just dial it in, reduce the density by one stop. It reduces the overall light hitting the sensor.
But the relative difference between your lights, that ratio you worked so hard to create, stays exactly the same.
It's faster, it's cleaner, keeps everyone happier, especially clients who might suddenly say, can we make it a little brighter?
Yeah, you just twist the dial. Done. It really streamlines the whole on-set process. His suggested workflow is basically an inversion of the old way.
Totally. First, set your creative parameters, aperture for depth of field, shutter speed for motion or flicker. Second, maybe add just a base level of ND, just enough so you have room to adjust up or down.
Okay.
Third, light your scene. Get your overall exposure in the ballpark. Get your ratios how you want them.
And fourth?
Use the variable ND for those final precise exposure adjustments. Nail it.
It's a completely different mindset compared to the traditional set exposure first, then fiddle with creative settings if you have to.
Right.
He also touches on how this saves you in tricky environments like corporate offices, mixed lighting, computer monitors everywhere.
Oh yeah, those can be tough. You've got bright windows, dim cubicles, and those pesky monitors that always seem to scan on camera.
So with this method, you can set your aperture once for the depth of field you want across the whole office space.
Keep it consistent.
And critically, you set your shutter speed to exactly match the monitor refresh rate to kill that annoying scanning bar.
Which, in the old days, might have forced you into a really narrow aperture to control the bright office light, completely losing that nice shallow depth of field you wanted.
But now, you lock in your look the depth of field, no monitor flicker, and you simply use the variable ND filter to dial the exposure up or down as you move between, say, a bright window area and a darker interior space.
You maintain your creative consistency and solve the technical headaches all at once.
It's a really powerful illustration of how variable ND filters, especially those integrated electronic ones, offer this level of creative freedom and just, well, operational efficiency that wasn't really easy before.
Precisely because ISO, aperture, and shutter speed are now seen through this different lens, thanks to how much sensors have advanced.
So the big takeaway then from all this material is that modern cameras, the sensors inside them, and our post-production tools have fundamentally changed the roles of those traditional exposure controls.
Yeah, ISO is primarily about dynamic range now and giving you flexibility in post.
Aperture and shutter. They're purely creative tools for look and feel.
Which leaves the variable ND filter as the indispensable, dedicated tool for controlling the intensity of light on set without forcing you to compromise your artistic choices.
It means you're no longer having to sacrifice, say, your desired shallow focus or your perfect motion blur just to get the exposure right.
Exactly. You set your look first, dial in the light second with the ND. It makes those onset tweaks so much quicker, less disruptive.
Preserving those carefully crafted lighting setups.
And just keeps the whole shoot running smoother. Keeps everyone happier, honestly.
And it's obviously a game changer for tackling difficult lighting situations or pulling off specific creative effects in really challenging conditions. Understanding this paradigm shift feels pretty vital if you're aiming to produce the best quality footage today.
Absolutely. And just as Chris encourages, you should really try this approach out yourself on your own gear, see how it feels.
Yeah, test it out.
And Chris wraps up by pointing out, sensor technology isn't stopping here. It's only going to keep evolving.
Which will likely change how we think about exposure even further in the future.
Mm-hmm. And that raises a really interesting question, I think, for anyone involved in capturing images.
What does this constant evolution actually mean for our fundamental understanding of light capture? How we interact with it?
And maybe more pressingly, how quickly will cinematographers, DPs, even enthusiasts need to adapt their workflows just to keep pace with the camera sitting right there in their hands?
That's definitely something to consider as you think about your own kit or maybe as you plan out that next shoot. A lot to chew on there.
That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah, really great insights today. Thanks for tuning in and spending some time with us.
Thank you for joining us on the CNOMADIC Trail. We hope today's journey sparked new ideas and sharpened your eye behind the lens. Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and as always, happy filming.